Welcome back. It is Thursday, the 8th of June, 2023. Man, this is going by fast. I've got three interior ribs in. I've got 7 interior ribs to go today. I think I'll get a minimum of 4 more done. So finishing off this left fuel tank and then get the first 2 ribs in the right fuel tank, maybe more. We'll see. It's hot. And the heat's really kicking my ass. So we'll see what gets done. I did want to add one thing. I mentioned in the last video that these second and third ribs that I did yesterday, I did them in one session where I mixed up a batch of sealant, enough for 2. And if you're curious, I mixed up 1.5 ounces of the base. So plus, you know, 1/10 of that for the accelerant. And that was more than enough to get these done, including at the end going around and putting little Hershey's Kisses over each of the rivet heads. So what I did was I slopped up one rib, got it into position, and then I took that sealant and I put it inside the refrigerator. When this rib was done being riveted, I went back inside the house, grabbed that stuff out of the refrigerator to get it a little bit of time to come up to temp, while I smoothed out the fillets on this rib, hoping that by the time I was ready to start slopping up this one, that stuff would have been warmed up enough that it was malleable. It seemed to work okay. I'm going to try to do the same thing again today. Really shouldn't require much more explanation to that. We should probably just start building and enjoy the weather. Thanks for being here. I'll check in with you later.
So the 30 minutes of prep time that I referred to in the beginning was basically cleaning up the mess from the previous day. All of those, the bucking bars are just sticky and gross, and making sure that I have some cleanup materials nearby to keep the process moving, you know, once you're going here. I would recommend that when you do this, start by riveting the lower side of the skin, just because the very leading edge rivet, especially on the upper part of the skin where there's a lot of curve there, is kind of tricky to set. And so in any new session, might as well start with the easiest ones on the bottom side, just to kind of get your rhythm with bucking rivets. And then if you do make a boo-boo, make it on the bottom of the wing. And then, so I do a lot of jumping back and forth at both sides of the table, because I want to make sure that each rib that I place, I start with the riveting on the lower side, the bottom side of the skin. I think that there, on the previous day, there was one that I started on the opposite side and I regretted it. Anyways, yeah, I expected it to be so much more difficult to get these ribs in place and getting the holes lined up, but it hasn't been that big of a deal, which is shocking. I think that maybe the Pro Seal provides a little bit of lubricant when you're trying to get that last little bit, get the ribs seated down into the nose. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I expected it to be so much more difficult to get those lined up. If you haven't done this before, you get them all fitted and everything, and then, of course, once you dimple everything, then that increases the thickness of the skin where those ribs are going to go in, and it makes it more difficult to get them in place. So pay attention here. I made a boo-boo here that cost me a little bit of time. So first thing I'm doing is just getting all the rivets loaded up. And with my little piece of paper, scooping out the little blobs of squeeze out from the dimples. But I get all the rivets loaded up. They don't really move once you get them in there. And I start riveting the lower side of the skin, working from the leading edge to the trailing edge. And when I get to the very top there, I'm not really happy with how the very last rivet set. It's because I had that stupid stick in there the whole time, and so it was holding that gap open. So I ended up having to drill that last rivet out, and it messed up the hole, so I just upsized it and used an oops rivet in that hole. So it's all good now, but that cost me a little bit of time and aggravation. And you can kind of see it from this side right here, the very top one. It looks like it's a big dimple or dent. It's not. It's just the appearance there because of I scuffed the hole that I upsized to get a clean edge around that dimple. Anyways, this moving into the second rib in here. The riveting actually goes fairly quickly once you get a rhythm and you kind of figure out how to manage the bucking bar on those slippery rivet tails. And so I started, you kind of know the feel and the sound when the rivet is set to the proper height. And then I would use the bucking bar to kind of wipe the top of the rivet and then just look at the quality of the set. And that seemed to work pretty well. We'll do a little intermission here.
Update time. All 5 of the interior ribs on the left wing have been riveted on, and it's cleaned up, and yeah, that's done. Which means that today I did 2 ribs in a total of 3.5 hours. The first 30 minutes was prep. The next 30 minutes was the total time to install the 2 ribs, including the cleanup afterwards. I'm going to take a break now, come back, and see if I can't get 2 ribs done on the right wing. So there you go.
Work session number 2, moving on to the right tank, starting off by, once again, a final cleaning of all the mating surfaces and then assembling this whole thing so that it's nice and square when I start working on the final installment of the ribs, which will, in this case, be in the foreground. This is the outboard end there where you see the filler neck. And that's where we're going to start, is in that last bay. I will put all of the ribs in place, including the end ribs, just to make sure that it's all tight and square. And then per the instructions, once you get that, I call it the number 6 rib, slathered up with the slop and clecoed in place, then they say just do that, then go ahead and take off that end rib so you have room to work. And that's what I do. I'm not kidding. I spent, of the 6 hours and 37 minutes that I worked yesterday, at least 30 minutes of that time was just putting on effing gloves. I'm telling you, man, once your hands are just a little bit, it's so hot and like oh man, what a struggle. But these are good problems to have. Anyways, getting the first one clecoed in place and ready to go, and then I'll pop that rib out and start riveting. This one's fairly easy because I don't have to climb up on a ladder to reach down inside to set these first rivets. So I think that including assembling the fuel tank like we have it right now, and all of the work of slopping up and installing these rivets and the cleanup and everything, this second session was 3 hours in total with all of that. And it was fairly clean work. All those little spots all over the place, and if you were to look inside my tank, you would see along the flanges between the rivets and along the skin right there, they're basically just fingerprints, because this stuff gets everywhere. And if you're like me, you probably use a couple of your fingers to make sure that the bucking bar is sitting level or perpendicular to the perpendicular, parallel, whatever you want to call it, square. How about that? Sitting square. If I have time here, one little and I think you'll see me bust out the other camera and try to get a shot of it, but the battery died. When it comes to encapsulating the rivet heads at the end, that's one of the slowest parts of the work. But one thing that I found on this day that was pretty effective is I'm trying to get a nice clean peak all the way around. And what I found is if you if you're fairly generous when you place that little piece of tube over the rivet head, give a little twist to let it seat, and then just pull it straight up. It gives a nice even peak all the way around. If you twist it on the way up, sometimes it'll hug to the side of the rivet and be really thin there. So just to pull straight up, and a little bit of suction and vacuum that it creates will create a nice little kind of wizard hat. That's episode 64. Thank you.